Howdy folks and welcome. This video is about Express Sessions. If you're looking for a simple way to manage sessions in your app, Express Sessions is a great library to use to do that. And so I'll take you through a very simple setup and a very bare bones app that will demonstrate how Express Sessions works and how you can use it to manage sessions in your app. All right, let's get started. Okay, so what is Express Session and what can it do? Well, Express Session is middleware for the server. And what it does is it allows the server to keep track of unique clients and keep track of information associated with those clients. And that information can persist even if the user reloads their browser or quits their browser or what have you. This information by default is stored in memory in the server, but it can be configured to be stored outside of the server in a database or other ways as well. So it does this by using cookies. Express Session will generate a cookie and send it to the client to have the client store it there if they're visiting the site for the first time. On subsequent requests by that client, the cookie is automatically attached to the headers of the HTTP requests to that server, and Express Session can look at those cookies and say, oh, here's a session ID. That's basically all that's being stored in these cookies is an ID representing a session. So if I have visited an Express Session site before, I will be passing along a cookie with a unique ID representing my session. It will then use that ID to look up any information that might be associated with that session. And so after that information is gathered, it's passed along to the remaining functionality of the server, such as the routes. And we can access this session information inside of the routes because it is being bound to the request object. So let's just jump right into it and see how we set it up and just see how we access this information. So I'm not going to get into every detail of how this app works. Real quick, I've installed Express and Express Session, MySQLized, and MySQL2 and SQLize, along with .env and bcrypt. So Express Session is implemented in the server. If you're familiar with setting up an Express server, most of this will look familiar. The only new part will be this session variable, which is an instance of the Express Session middleware. That gets passed just like any other middleware using the .use, just like we use for our routes or for express.json, etc., etc. It gets passed as middleware, and it also takes in some configuration options, which are being defined right here. And so here are those configuration options. So like I said, Express Session generates a cookie that gets stored on the client, and it represents a session ID, that cookie does. That session ID is generated and encrypted using this secret, which is just a string. It's stored in my .env file, and it's just random. And your session ID will just be a long, complex, random seeming string. These options are sort of unimportant. It's just basically saying that we're going to resave this session information every time a request happens. The cookie options, there are more options than this, but right here I'm setting an expiration time to 1 hour, which happens to be 3,600,000 milliseconds. So you can configure an expiration time for these cookies, and they will simply become invalid and get deleted if they have passed their expiration time. So that's as simple as that. Once you've done that, once you've implemented this middleware, session objects will be created and passed to your subsequent routes. So let's have a look at some routes. Let's have a look at an API route, particularly some user routes. Here we are at /API/users, and we're going to look at a sign up route, post route. I'm creating a new user using email and password, and here's where we actually interact with the session object created by Express Session. The request object, which we always have as a parameter in our routes, now has this session object as a property of it. And that has this .save method, which is the recommended way to modify the session information. And so what's being done here is when a new user is created or signed up, I want them to be logged in. And so we're simply adding a property, logged in equals true, to this session object. It didn't have a logged in property. We just made this up and we're using it for our own purposes, setting it to true. And that's great. So this app that I made here also has some home routes that render some very bare bones, unstyled HTML. And within each home route, I'm actually console logging that session object. And that's happening right here, rec.session. So if I, hit the root path, I will be served this login page. And right before that, we'll also get to see the rec.session object. So let's do that. I've already run my schema and reset the database, so there shouldn't be any users stored in this database. And the server has stopped, so there isn't any session information. We're starting fresh. So I'm going to run npm start, and my server is running on localhost 3001. So let's go ahead and visit that, which will basically hit this route. And here we are. Here's our session object. Not a whole lot to it, really. We have this nested cookie object with a few properties here, and this is reflecting the 1 hour from now. I'm assuming that's right. Yeah. It's 9:50 p.m. here, and that looks like it represents 10:50 somehow, But so if I go ahead and sign up as a new user, I'm going to hit this API route, which then calls rec.session.save and adds a property to it. Logged in equals true. So let's go ahead and do that. I will go ahead and add a password here and hit sign up. So I'm going to make a fetch request to that endpoint when I hit sign up. And it looks like I was successful. And it's going to console log the session object again and see there's now this logged in property set to true. So now you can see that this is a way of keeping track of information during a user's session. I can reload the browser multiple times and it's going to re-console log that and show that this property is persisting. If I were to log out, I would be hitting this route down here, which calls rec.session.destroy, which gets rid of that cookie entirely, and thus we're no longer logged in. So let's do that. Let's log out. So what happened here is I was logged out, the cookie was destroyed, but I was redirected back to this root page, which sent another HTTP request to this Express server, which then generated a brand new session object from scratch, a default unmodified session object with no logged in property. So, you can use this a whole number of ways. Like I said, you can use this to keep track of shopping carts, authentication status like I am here. If you look at the home routes, if I were to try to access /home, which is that page that said, congratulations, you logged in successfully using Express Sessions, it's not going to work because I'm checking here to see if I'm logged in on the sessions object, and only then will I serve that page up. If not, it's going to take me to this not logged in.html. So let's try that. Like if I were to manually add home to the URL, instead I get sent to this page, so I can use that anchor tag and go back to the home page. And I could try logging in. And boom, there's that logged in true property again. And you know, maybe for fun, let's do this. Let's go to the server and change the expiration time to 5,000. So 5 seconds. So I have to stop and start the server for that to take effect. And so what I'll do is I'll just recreate the same user. And, oh, right, no, the database persists. So let's create a new user. Great. And, you know, if it's been about 5 seconds, I'll reload this a few more times. And sure enough, I get taken to this page again. Let's try that one more time. I'll go to mic 3. I sign up. Congrats. I reload. Still hasn't been 5 seconds. But then I reload again. And my cookie has expired. And so, but then I'm sent this file. I've sent another HTTP request. So there is yet another cookie. It's just not one that's valid anymore. 5 seconds is a bit short. So, we'll go back to, I think that's the right number of zeros there. So that's a basic gist of it. The key methods here are being called within your routes. They are accessing the session information by using rec.session, and they're calling the .save method on that object, which is, like I said, the recommended way to update and modify the session object, I think because it completes that saving procedure prior to proceeding with this response. I don't know. I've just always used the rec.session.save method to modify it. Then there's also rec.session.destroy, which is handy for things like logging out or just clearing any session information. So there's plenty more to learn about Express Session, but it is a very handy and simple way to keep track of session information. And just by implementing the functionality that I've shown you in this code, you're well on your way to using it for not just authentication, but whatever you want. So I hope that this gives you a nice, clear understanding of Express Session and how sessions work and how cookies are utilized to implement it. And I hope you're excited about being able to keep track of session information in your apps. All right, folks, happy coding. See you next time.